firstly, I want to just pray. Allow me to pray. The prayers that are actually prayed in Parliament every day that the House of Commons sits before the television cameras are switched on. And if you can just sort of listen to the words, they were very meaningful for me and for the relatively few Christian MPs who I had the privilege of working with in Parliament for those 14 years until just last year. So here are the prayers. Lord, the God of righteousness and truth, grant to our King and his government, to members of Parliament and all in positions of responsibility, the guidance of your Spirit. May they never lead the nation wrongly through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideals. But laying aside all private interests and prejudices, keep in mind their responsibility to seek to improve the condition of all mankind. So may your kingdom come and your name be hallowed. Amen. Aren't they wonderful words? Of course, a lot more MPs actually came in to Parliament to hear those words, because actually, if you wanted to secure a seat in the House of Commons for the day, the way to do it was to come in for prayers and obtain a little prayer card that you can put on the back of your chair with your name on. I thought God has a great sense of humour sometimes, doesn't he? On Prime Minister's Questions Day, there were hundreds of MPs who were in the House when those prayers were read. But I wanted to talk to you today about what difference a Christian MP can make. Can indeed a Christian MP make a difference? And allow me to speak from, if I may, my own personal experience for a good part of this speech. For me, it was not just about being salt and light in the House of Commons, in the way that I interacted with colleagues or treated my staff, or about being a member of the all-party group for Christians, good as that was. And indeed, we not only held a couple of outreaches a year, but we would also be responsible for organising the National Prayer Breakfast, which is a very important gathering in our country. And if you haven't heard John Lennox's talk from this year's, then please do go online. I think it's on the line on the Bible Society website. But no, for me, being in Parliament, being a member of Parliament was about much more than that, important though all of that is. I was there because I wanted to influence policy. I wanted to see the laws of our land be laws which reflect godly principles. I'll give you a few examples, if I may, shortly. But first of all, I want to just emphasise how important it is to encourage the next generation of Christians to consider whether God is calling them to Parliament. And by the way, it has to be a calling for a Christian, because otherwise, in this predominantly secular society, a Christian MP will be attacked, not just from the political parties opposite, but from not just from the pressures of the job, which I thought I would just give you an inkling of, if you'll bear with me for a moment, but also from the spiritual forces of darkness, which clearly don't want to see Christians in Parliament, don't want to see the Christian principles that we all believe in and which we've heard of already today, influencing policy, don't want to see, as the expression goes, the government on his shoulders. Let me read, if I may, an extract from something that Caroline Ansell has written. Now, Caroline Ansell was a lovely Christian colleague of mine. She was MP for Eastbourne for 7 years. She's now Director of Policy and Advocacy for Care, just round the corner in Romney Street. And bear with me, because I want to read quite a bit of what she's recently written about being an MP. Nothing quite prepared me for life as an MP. The expectations are towering and immediate. On day one, I opened my new inbox to find over 2,000 emails, calls for national and international action, were interwoven with very personal requests for my urgent help. Recruiting my parliamentary team started immediately, but takes time. My team underwent training in self-defense. In 2017, when a local man went to prison for threatening to kill me, it was the first case of its kind in the country. By the time I left the House of Commons in 2024, it was to a penny. She continues, during my only 7 years, I lost 2 parliamentary colleagues through the murders of Joe Cox and David Amis. As a legacy of my time in Parliament, I have a sizable bag attached to the letterbox of my front door, which protects me from incendiary devices, and a panic button, which is now disconnected, as she's no longer in the house, by my bed. And for all its benefits, I'm afraid social media would go into my room 101. There's something particularly pernicious about nameless, faceless adversaries, those keyboard warriors who stalked my every post and who were so relentless in their judgment and hate. And as an MP, you certainly make sacrifices. Divorce rates spike in Parliament. You live in different worlds. Your children are starved of your time. So when Kate Forbes announced she wasn't going to run for re-election in Scotland, I understood without question. She wants another child, and Parliament can take everything you've got. It's sobering, isn't it? Why did I read that to you? Not, I hope, to completely put any of you off who are thinking about becoming Member of Parliament, but because this is a spiritual battle. Being in Parliament for a Christian is spiritual warfare. We need all the protection we can get. And I want to pay particular tribute to Prayer for Parliament, the group who prayed for me and for all others in Parliament, and particularly for Christian MPs, throughout my time there. Because I found that if you are called to Parliament, despite all these challenges, then if you're called as a Christian, God will protect and anoint you. I used to read Ephesians 6, putting on the armour of God, every morning before I walked past this building here on my way to Parliament when I was in the House for my first parliamentary term. And God was faithful. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever had, actually, when I became an MP, was play to an audience of one. And so I left fulfilled, and I left believing that I had spoken out in Parliament during my time, and it was right for me to go to pass the baton on to the next generation. But in terms of working hours, being a Member of Parliament, whether Christian or not, is, as Caroline mentioned, it's not just a job, it's a way of life. It's absolutely all-demanding and all-encompassing. Just allow me, again, just to describe the working week, because the work pressures are enormous. Your week will start perhaps as a Sunday night or Monday morning when you travel to Westminster from home. I was 3 hours from here, from the north of England. During the journey, I would work on the hundreds of emails which would have accumulated over the weekend. And beware any MP who didn't respond to a constituent. You'd likely see very soon in the local paper or latterly on social media, my MP didn't help me, which is what you don't want to see, particularly if your majority is slim. So the House of Commons sits on a Monday at 2:30, earlier for the rest of the week, and so you might be attending the House, but that really is the absolute tip. What people see on the television when an MP speaks in the House of Commons is the absolute tip of all the mountain of work that you have to do during the week. So you may be holding meetings, you may be sitting on a select committee, meeting with an all-party group, drafting a speech, meeting with a lobby organisation. A constituent has by custom, the right to call in and ask to see you at any time when the House is sitting. And then the working with your staff, and at 10 o'clock at night on a Monday, the House would vote. So normally on not just a Monday night after we'd voted, because voting can take a round of voting takes 20 minutes, so you can imagine if you're 2 or 3 votes, you can be approaching midnight before you're leaving the house on a Monday. But I would usually never leave the house much before 11 o'clock at night on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then on a Thursday night, travel back to Congleton and arrive home again shortly before midnight. My husband would pick me up, my long-suffering and absolutely remarkable husband. And unless you have a family who will support you in this role, then it really will be difficult for anyone it is difficult for anyone to do this job. And on a Friday morning, I'm back in my constituency office by 9 o'clock to face a week's work, which will have accumulated in the constituency office with my wonderful staff there, which I had to try and clear on the Friday and the Saturday, whilst also attending schools, businesses, community groups, and holding surgeries. And of course, the surgeries, people come to you with absolutely anything. I thought I'd give you 1 or 2 examples. A young man asked me if I could help because his electricity bill was too high, and it did seem very high for not an enormous property, a kind of terrace property with an attic and in the constituency. And I and my staff contacted the electric board and challenged this bill and persisted when the board said, sorry, but this is the reading. And we said, well, it cannot be. It can't be. There's an injustice here. Anyway, we were stopped in our tracks when we had a call from the police shortly after that to say, could you please stop taking action on behalf of this young man? He is running a cannabis factory. Another of my colleagues had someone who came to see them, a woman, it was fortunately a female MP, to say, could she help her because she'd had a breast enlargement operation, but she wasn't very happy with the size or the shape of it. The mind boggles. So, an all-encompassing, demanding job. So you're buffeted constantly. You're constantly buffeted. Time to think doesn't exist. Time to read. No wonder ministers say, just give it me on 1 A4 sheet. You've very little time to read. You're buffeted by the tiredness, the volume of emails, the demands of constituents emailing, vote this way or vote that, your local political parties' expectations, who have, of course, selected you and can deselect you, lobby groups, the press, family problems, the whips, the managing of 2 officers, your staff in London and your staff in the constituency, social media attacks, physical attacks, and not least by, in terms of your voting and your conscience, your own ambitions. I was absolutely staggered within literally hours of arriving at Parliament. And I'd never worked in Parliament before I became an MP. I'd only ever been in there for about 3 hours. It was a completely new world for me, although it took me 20 years to get there. But I was staggered that sitting in the tea room, how so many of the new MPs were, I'm going to say this, it seemed to be mainly men, were actually saying, right now, I want to be a minister. The ambition there was drives them. And when it's a question of voting with the party to keep your voting slate clean in the hope that you will become a minister, or voting with your conscience, very many times you'll find the lure of ambition will win out. So the reason I wanted to tell you all of that was just to describe the life as a member of Parliament. And to say how sad it is that I found that, and I've seen countless people over the years strive to become an MP, only to leave disillusioned after 1 parliamentary term, because they didn't actually know why they were there. They hadn't actually worked out the principles on which they wanted to engage. They thought that being an MP would be an interesting job. It would be nice to have those 2 letters after your name, maybe. But they got frustrated very quickly because it's not easy to achieve anything in Parliament. It takes time, and it certainly takes working with others. And if they didn't make minister within, 1, 2, 3 years, they started to feel a failure. Fortunately, I never felt like that. I never felt like that. I went in every day through those gates, and I rejoiced at the privilege of walking through. I thank the Lord. I thank the Lord for the people who were praying for me to give me the energy to keep going. And I thank the Lord for the opportunity to be a voice in that place. For example, for the unborn child. Even if we didn't win the votes on the day, I was there, I was a voice. I was what President Roosevelt once called, I was in the arena. There's a wonderful, wonderful expression about being in the arena. Do look it up. It talks about how, the praise is for the man who is in the arena, not whether he wins, but the fact that he's there and he's fighting, and his face might be splattered with blood and dirt, he might fail again and again, but he is there fighting for high principles. And I always felt what an honour to be there, what a joy to be there. It was for me a huge privilege. God called me in. I knew God had called me in. And at the time to leave, he called me out. And it was my role to try to do what I could, to be a representation of those godly principles, to fight for them in policy, to challenge poor policies, to fight for policies that make society work best, not the you could call them the liberal policies, or you could call them, and by that I mean social liberalism, not the Liberal Party, or perhaps Robin referred to them as the progressive policies, those policies which have so damaged our society over the recent generation and two. But why did I rejoice, and why was I not buffeted as so many of my colleagues were, so many of them ground down to not enjoying the job, just voting with the party line, often just struggling to get through the day. One reason was, apart from the prayer support I had, was that I knew why I was there. And one of the reasons I knew why I was there, a key reason I knew why I was there, was because in about 2002, long before I got to Parliament, because I actually stood in 6 elections. I was, as a local councillor, I was trying to get selected to stand. I stood in my first election in 2005, which I lost. But in about 2002, my dear friend, the late Dennis Wrigley, leader of Maranatha, the prayer organisation, I can see some of you nodding there, knew him too. And he was actually one of the signatories to the original 2010 Westminster Declaration, which we're seeking to renew today. He said to me, Fiona, if you want to be an MP, you write down, under a heading, I believe, why you want to be in Parliament. What is it that you want to actually fight on? And so I did. I wrote it down. I have it here. It's not an intellectually rigorous list, but it's about why I stood in Parliament. I'll just read you some of them. I believe families matter. Strong, stable families are the heart of a healthy nation. I believe that every life is precious. No insignificant person has ever been born. Many TV programs and media products are a negative influence on children. Strong local communities matter. A good education includes giving young people principles, values, and boundaries. So on. Now, what amazed me was several years later, I read the 2010 Westminster Declaration, and I thought how wonderful it was. I was amazed, actually. I shouldn't have been amazed, because, of course, these are Christian principles. I was amazed how much of it chimed with what I'd written down on this sheet. This sheet, which I actually had on my wall in Parliament for the whole time I was there. And I stood on these principles in all 6 of my elections. I had a leaflet produced which had them on. And I was often, constituents would say to me, I'm not conservative, But as he said, I believe in what you're saying here about the kind of society we should have and the principles that we should have in our society. But what they did on my wall, they confirmed to me and clarified to me why I was there and how I should prioritize my time when this buffeting happened, when you were asked to do this, asked to do that by a lobby organisation, by the party, by the whips, by so many other demands on your time. This kept me grounded. Apart from fulfilling my constituency obligations, this helped me prioritise my time. One of the reasons that I believe that the 2025 Westminster Declaration is so important is that I believe we've got to help Christian MPs in particular and those who will come into Parliament to know why they are there and have worked that out before they actually even stand for Parliament, so that they will not be buffeted and that they can remain faithful to the reason that they stood in the first place. But there's more than that, and I'll come on to that in a moment, that is really important. And I think if any of you know of young people who are thinking of going to Parliament, then once we have finalised the 2025 declaration, do take your opportunity to go through that with them. If there are candidates seeking for selection, to talk to them, actually whether Christian or not. But let me give you just an example of how I was so grateful to the Lord that Dennis had asked me to set out why I was there and how it helped me ensure that this buffeting, even from, for example, personal ambition, I was protected from it. And to give you a couple of examples of how I believe Christian MPs together made a difference during my time there. In 2015, I was asked 3 times to become a parliamentary private secretary. I'd been asked in the earlier Parliament, and I said, "Well, I'm really not mature enough in parliamentary terms. I've never worked in Parliament before. I'm still finding my feet." But then when I was asked in 2015, and being a PPS is the first rung on the ministerial ladder. You're the minister's bag carrier, but you get to go into the department and see how things work behind the scenes. But that year I knew that assisted suicide was going to come up in the ballot. I knew that some MP was going to be approached by the lobby organisation that has spent years preparing for bringing that bill to Parliament again. And I knew that I had to be ready to fight the campaign against that, against the legalisation of assisted suicide. And so I said to the whips, "I'm sorry, but and I said, why? I said, I believe this will come up and I want to be free to fight it. And indeed it did. It came top of the ballot of private members' bills that September. And the wonderful thing was that because I was free to prioritise my time after looking after my constituents, I was able to have the privilege of leading the handful of Christian MPs who successfully opposed the 2015 assisted dying bill. And I believe in the 10 years from then until now, we had the privilege of saving thousands of lives. That's the difference. And it was months of coordinated work in Parliament. I spoke to about 140 MPs personally, individually, asking them and explaining to them why it wouldn't be good to vote for this. So that's the difference just a handful of Christian MPs working together can make. Another example is that together we defeated the Sunday trading bill, which was put forward by Prime Minister Cameron and the Chancellor Osborne for commercial reasons, they said, which would have done away with the vestiges of Sabbath in our country. It would have meant that all shops, including the big supermarkets, could open for all hours every day of the year, bar Easter Sunday and Christmas Day. But despite a heavy 3-line whip, just a handful of us, led by the wonderful David Burrows, who was then in the House, because most votes need a leading MP who's willing to actually organise the voting when you challenge something like that. But just a handful of us, and actually it was amazing that this went to a vote because it was a 3-line whip, and usually when the government thinks it's going to lose, they pull the vote. But they didn't believe that we could do it. But we did it. We defeated that bill. And still, those vestiges of Sunday hours protecting workers who would otherwise have to work those hours on a Sunday and can instead be at least for part of Sunday, those vestiges of the Sabbath remain in our country today. And the last example I'll give you of a number of areas where we worked together was in terms of the family. Lord Farmer and I, Lord Farmer in the Lords, worked together to try to press successive governments, successive prime ministers, to put resources into strengthening family life in our country. For several years, we would meet on a Monday afternoon in my office to work out who that week we could press in Parliament for the strengthening of family life, which minister, which MP could we get on our side. We called debates, we asked parliamentary questions, we corralled colleagues. We produced in 2017 a manifesto for the family with 18 policies in for strengthening family life. We brought representatives. One of those policies was to try and promote family hubs across the country, a place a bit like the CAB. If you have a financial problem, you can go for financial advice. A family hub is somewhere, if you have a family problem, whether it's a toddler or managing a toddler, or your teenagers doing drugs, or your relationships breaking down, or you have a debt problem, it's a place where voluntary organisations like CAP can work together with, supported by the local authority in terms of funding, can provide somewhere for people to go when they have a problem to try and strengthen their family life. Obviously, years ago, the church would have been there, wouldn't it? But so many people haven't got that now. So there were a few across the country, just a handful, and we brought them to Parliament, to meeting rooms, and we'd have MPs come and meet them and understand what they were about. And after years, in fact, over a decade of campaigning for family life from personal perspective, but working with other MPs, by 2020, the Conservative government actually provided £300 million to set up family hubs in half the local authorities across the country. And just last month, the Labour government has committed another £500 million towards strengthening family hubs, and there are now over 900 family hubs across the country. Yes, Christian MPs can make a difference. But if you reflect on what I've told you, if you reflect on the laws that I managed to, in a small measure and absolutely working with others, was able to influence, they were in effect holding back a tide, weren't they? We didn't actually get any government to promote marriage. We didn't actually reduce the number of weeks of abortion in our abortion law. But I think it's really interesting now that something appears to be happening. I don't know how many of you have heard of the phrase, the quiet revolution. Yeah, I can see some nods here. What this is that there seems to be a movement of young men and women, interestingly, noticeably men, because, as long as I've been alive, there have always been more women and more young women in the church, frustratingly. But there seems to be a movement now of young men and women coming back today to the Christian church in noticeable numbers to different denominations. I've spoken with the people from the AOG, the Catholic Church. I'm in the Church of England. We can see it there in some of our churches and in other denominations. And it's quiet because this hasn't been organised. There's no leadership. There's no national movement for this. But it seems to be organic rather than organised. In effect, it's the Holy Spirit moving. Now, I just take you back a little bit, if I may. People assume that I must have been a Christian all my life. Actually, I got saved at 27. At that time, I was a partner in a law firm, and I'd got a flash flat in the city. I'd got a country cottage. I'd got a new BMW, and I was utterly, utterly miserable because God had given me what the world, if you like, offered. Many people strive for all their lives, and I was fortunate enough to see that actually they're empty vessels. It was not fulfilling. And what I think is happening in a much wider way in our society today is that these young people are seeing that the liberal experiment, if I can call it that for a moment, in our society over the last 2 generations simply isn't working. That it has failed. That it is not just not fulfilling, but it is seriously damaging and distressing their generation and failing them. And they want something different. And they're looking at and they're listening to and they're learning from the Christian church. And this is so encouraging. Because what is in addition really interesting for me, because after I left Parliament, I was very happy to leave. I felt it was the right time for me to go. Totally peaceful about that. But you do have to think, well, you know, what do I prioritise my time on? And apart from going back into my law firm, which I love, and I'm there full time again now, and it's wonderful to be working with alongside committed Christian lawyers. But apart from that, I felt it was as much a feeling as a circumstance, because I would be invited to speak to groups of young people. And what has really been noticeable to me is how many young Christians are coming up to me and saying, I am praying about whether God is calling me to become a member of Parliament. Now, I've not had this before, not like this year, not like this moment in time. And these are bright, winsome, intelligent young people. They have almost a sense of urgency to push back against what has been done to their world, to their society in this country. And this sense of calling to be in that place, to have a vote to do so. And it's not just one or two. It's almost every time now I speak to young people that they're coming up to me. Now, cast your mind back to the policy influence I told you about. As I say, all I could do with the small group of Christians I worked with, committed Christians who wanted to challenge policy, was basically to hold back a tide, to stave off assisted dying for 10 years, to delay the introduction of abortion up to birth, which we now have decriminalised with the taking of a pill at home. Even the family hubs, which are so admirable, we're really patching up the damage that's already occurred, aren't we, when people go. We were never in a position to promote, for example, the 18 policies that I and just a few other MPs put in that 2017 manifesto for the family to promote marriage, to say this is the ideal way for a family to live. We will support others who find themselves in a different situation, but marriage is good for people, it's good for society. But a bigger group of young people called by God. And as I say, it has to be called by, you have to be called by God as a Christian, because otherwise you will be buffeted, not just by that way of life I've talked about as an MP, but by those spiritual forces. But if we could see a sizable number of young Christians into Parliament, I believe they could not just hold back this tide of liberalism, of progressivism, but they could actually see Christian principles brought back into our society and society changed. And that's what I want to see. That's why I want us to encourage these young people. That's why I'm asking you to pray for these young people. Could it even be that we could see some of the principles contained in this 2025 Westminster Declaration put into the next manifesto of a political party? Because I know from my working in the Foreign Office how vital it is that words are in a manifesto, because the civil servants, and I'm my experience is, personally, many of them do not do God, as the expression goes, but the civil servants will respect a manifesto. It will be hard, but if we can get principles, as in this 2025 Westminster Declaration, let me just suggest one or two of them that ought to be in the next manifesto. If we can pray that this group of young people who, and these increase, and it's not organised. This is the Holy Spirit moving, I believe. And there are now, we need to pray also for organisations like CARE, who every year has a group of interns who work alongside MPs in Parliament. Pray for organisations like CARE. There are others who are seeking to help young people who want to get into Parliament, to help them understand what it means, what will be involved, so that they won't be like me. I knew when I was called into politics, I knew nobody, I knew nothing about it, I'd never been in Parliament. It took me a parliamentary term to understand how it all worked. But let's try and pray for organisations who are seeking to help these young people who may feel called to be a member of Parliament, or in some other way to support parliamentarians. So some of the policies, look at this in the 2025 draft draft Westminster Declaration. Could we call for policies in a manifesto for legislation that strengthens family life, and to promote marriage as a lasting commitment, to develop fiscal and other policies which support and encourage marriage, to promote freedom of conscience for medical and administrative and other staff, for religious or other reasons, to decline participation in any procedure relating to abortion. Now that the Supreme Court has ruled that the terms man and a woman in the Equality Act refer to biological sex, to ensure that the Department of Education require that classroom teaching reflects this ruling, and so on. There are other provisions in this 2025 Westminster Declaration that it would be wonderful to see not only individual MPs using and prioritising as they work in Parliament, but as a group working together to see them brought into laws. Please encourage them. Please pray for them, because actually we all have a part to play, don't we? Much depends on those of you in this room here today. I know I couldn't have done the small amount I did in Parliament over those 14 years without prayer backup of faithful Christians. Please play your part. Please pray for these young people today. Thank you.